Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition or episode of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 89. We are just 11 episodes away from that very high, significant, all important, even though they're all important, that all important 100th episode. You can tell I mention it every time. I'm really excited about it. But I'm, of course, equally excited about today. For our 89th episode, as you know, every single episode, we kind of travel virtually all over the world because we have devotees and non-devotees, whatever that means. I don't like that term, non-devotee. From all over the world, people tune in to hear what our guest has to say. And today we're going back to the United States of America. I'm delighted to welcome our guest this week. It's Belle.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Belle. Thank you
much
so much for joining us. No worries at all. Thank you for being willing to tune in. It's great to have you with us. Usually I try to say something about the guest before we get started, but I don't know a lot about Belle, which is actually really good. So when I ask the questions, I will also be surprised by the answers, which is great. So Belle, let's start off with a nice, easy question. Please tell us about you and where you're from.
All right. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Before I begin, if I could just do a quick invocation, get the energy settled, get myself centered, and also have anyone who's listening get centered as well. That will just take a moment if anyone's unfamiliar with the invocation. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prajarine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, I pray that all goes well. I hope that I commit no offenses while also opening up dialogue and keeping this podcast as a container, a safe space for dialogue to happen, for discourse to happen. I believe that both truths can be held at once. I believe that we can have open, meaningful discussion without committing prajalpa, without taking offense, understanding that there are a lot of material world issues to be spoken about. So I pray that my words are received in good faith and in service, most importantly. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. What a wonderful start. That's fantastic.
Thank you. It's not me, it's for Krishna. So I'm sorry. Could you repeat your question, please?
Of course. Please tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
Simple question. My name is Belle, Annabelle. Everyone in the temple spaces know me as Belle. I am from Fort Lee, New Jersey at this moment. So larger sense, I am from the New York City area. Fort Lee is very close to uptown Manhattan. And when you take the train, when you go over this bridge that divides our states, and then you take the train downtown, you reach Matchless Gifts, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, a very special place where Srila Prabhupada, founder of ISKCON, set up shop in the city. And then you go down a couple more blocks and you reach the Bhakti Center, which is the temple where I've been taking association, doing some service. I've stayed there a couple of times. I've done some work there. That is my spiritual home, Bhakti Center on the Lower East Side in New York City.
Wow. Are you from New Jersey? I mean, like you were born there and stuff.
So I have lived in, no, actually, I'm from Yonkers, which is right outside, technically connected to the Bronx, which is a borough in New York City. I have lived in and around Manhattan, New York, my entire life. We call it the tri-state area here, kind of just this condensation of bordering boroughs, towns, whatnot, around Manhattan. I've grown up in that area.
Mm.
My entire life, the New York City metro. Um, and New Jersey happens to be where I'm at now. I did a lot of schooling here in Fort Lee. My parents, this is their house where I'm currently living. But actually, they just bought a house in Arizona. So that's going to be interesting. They'll be leaving, and at some point, I'll be going there.
And Arizona's far away, right, from New York?
Arizona's very far away, almost as long of a flight, if not as long as a flight to London, actually.
I mean, I can do geography a little bit and I can picture the United States, but in terms of the details, where all the states are, I mean, I know that California's over there and Texas down there and Florida, but Arizona, I'm not really sure, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
Arizona is about a 4, depending on the winds and whatnot, 4, 5, sometimes longer hour flight
yeah. I
here.
I mean, being from the UK, which is a relatively small country, I just think I can drive to the other side of the country in 2.5 hours.
That's crazy. That's
Whereas,
New
like,
Jersey.
have to fly 5 hours to get somewhere central, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. Yeah, because I'm all the way on the East Coast, so you can consider this New York City. So you
Yeah.
got New York, then all the way opposite 5, 6 hour flight is LA. Arizona's closer to that LA area. It's a couple hours drive from LA. And I'm all the way on the East Coast.
Tell us a bit about, if you want to, tell us a bit about your upbringing. What was your upbringing like?
Sure. Very relevant, actually, to this whole journey and story. My parents are anti-theists. I can't even call them atheists. I love them very much. I respect them. They're very hardworking and service-oriented in their own ways, and they did the best with the capacity that they had. So no criticism of them here. But, and at the same time, there's been a great disdain for religion that I was raised with, a humongous disdain. My mom's a college professor at Hofstra University, which is a pretty good school in Long Island, New York. This is her last year. My stepdad, who has raised me since I was about 7, is a physician. So very empirical. My parents are huge empiricists. Plenty of people in the sciences are and still hold it to be true that they believe in a higher power. Such was not the case in my upbringing. I'm of Jewish ethnicity, culture, ethno-religion, if you will. But my family, my blood family, they're actually refugees, if you will, immigrants from the former Soviet Union, from Moscow. My grandpa was born in a gulag in Kazakhstan in the late 1930s. My grandma, a bit more privileged, but still born under this communist regime. And then my mom was born of them in Moscow. So one important thing about that is, as many people know, under communist leadership, religion is a big, big no-no. You'd be surprised, though. You'd think that people would immigrate here or wherever it is that they immigrate to and then have some desire to get in touch with their roots, especially as Jewish people. You know, we came from so much pogrom. People like to talk about the Holocaust, and I say you're just scratching the surface. We are fraught with millennia of generational ancestral trauma. So you would think that upon escaping this communist regime, there would be some desire to at least connect with the origins of that Jewish culture, if not the religious aspects. But a lot of immigrants you'll find from those parts actually don't have a desire to. Perhaps it's a trauma response. I'm not going to try and over pathologize it, but my mom is very bitter towards religion. She doesn't even want to hear about her own Judaism. She doesn't care. Stepdad, he kind of grew up with white picket fence dreams. He was raised in America. So he went to Hebrew school. He was bar mitzvahed. And then he had kind of a white picket fence life with his ex-wife and my now stepsisters. And then I guess after that, he realized he didn't want that so much anymore. His kind of disdain for religion grew as he met my mom, and now he's more of an anti-theist than my mom. I guess he sort of realized, and this is also important without going on a tangent, because one thing that I find within Judaism as a Jewish person myself is there is a lot of mechanical practice, not a lot of authentic sadhana, at least in the West, when it comes to more reformed sects of Judaism. I think that a lot of us are operating from a place of cultural engagement and, as I said, desire to connect with our cultural roots after all the suppression that we've sustained. But I think as a result, we've kind of lost focus on the essence, on the divine source. And so a lot of Jews that I know, a lot of Westernized Jews, Reformed, secular Jews, find themselves knowing so much more Hebrew than I'll ever know, having gone through so much ritual, so much ceremony, but it's all material. Who has the best bat mitzvah, or in other words, for those who aren't familiar, coming of age party, ceremony, ritual, excuse me. Who has, the nicest dress, who has the nicest venue, who has the most friends to invite to these sorts of things. And then when people grow up, they enter their 20s, 30s, what have you, they're like, I went to Hebrew school for years so I could have my cool bar or bat mitzvah, and I don't know anything about what any of this means. I don't know what any of this means. I don't know if I believe in a God. I don't know if I care. I don't even know what Jewish community without just kind of nationalism and fear and ritual, and without all of that, what is God? We don't know. And that's a spiritual crisis that I think a lot of my Jewish peers are suffering from.
Yeah, I mean, we have a smallish Jewish community in the UK, but in terms of practicing Jews, people that observe the religion of Judaism, but there are a lot more people that are people of Jewish heritage by race. Some of my closest friends are Jewish by race, by their heritage, but they're not practicing Jews. They don't have any particular ceremonies. But you're actually, I mean, this is the 89th episode. I think at least 5 or 6 of the previous guests have also been of Jewish heritage and have said the same thing, that they don't particularly practice the religion of Judaism, but they are part of the race of Jewishness. Thank you for that. Can I just pick up on the term you've used, anti-theist? So atheist literally means a belief in no God, someone who's atheistic. So you're saying someone's anti-theist is they actively go out of their way to be against the idea of God.
That's how I'm going to use the term. I use it somewhat endearingly, but also with a little sadness, of course, in my heart. But I use it somewhat jokingly, lightly. Yeah, someone on a Bhakti retreat recently said something really profound. I was talking about my parents, and he said, atheism is the highest form of devotion there is, to be so steadfast in the fact that in your lack thereof, in the belief that there is no God, to be so steadfast in that. That's such a high form of belief in and of itself. That's such a high form of energy. And so I guess my parents fall under that category. But with I use the term anti-theist because my parents do actively, I'm going to say somewhat bad word, shit on religion. Forgive me. Then that is something that we still kind of butt heads over. They try and respect my practice and my commitment to a spiritual way of life as much as possible. And I try not to proselytize or anything like that, but that is something that living under the same roof right now, we definitely butt heads over.
So that actually leads me nicely on to the next question, or leads us nicely onto the next question, which is, how did you meet the devotees? Or in other words, how did you discover Krishna consciousness?
Well, so I was an atheist, as I was raised to be, anti-theist maybe, and it wasn't working. It just wasn't working at all. Maybe I'll get into it as this becomes more natural as we go along, but I come from a pretty rough adolescence. I mean, who else comes to Krishna consciousness in their late teens, early 20s? You got to be going through a crisis of some sort, let's be honest. So I was going through a series of crises. I kind of grew up, I had my adolescence sort of taken from me in a way. I had undiagnosed disabilities of learning disability, mood disorder, panic disorder, things of that nature. I won't get too much into labels. But I needed help, and that was going very much unseen because of a phenomenon known as masking, which is where a lot of feminine presenting people in particular, but anyone who deals with neuropsychological, neurocognitive, or developmental issue, a lot of people are able to kind of get by for a period of time based off of masking. So being able to present as neurotypical, which is contextual and that's a whole other podcast. I speak about that stuff when I do school things. But essentially, I was really struggling because as a young adult, my grades, I was a perfect student, I was a perfectionist, I was a musician and a very good one, and I had all my worth tied up in these material accomplishments. And also Russian cultures, post-Soviet cultures, very strict, very much you have to be your best, and if your best isn't near perfect, you suck. And that's what that worked for me because I didn't have much trouble masking, getting my good grades, doing my best without trying very hard as a child. But as I went into high school, I really began to struggle. People around me were studying, and I didn't know how to study. I couldn't listen anymore. I couldn't pay attention the same. I couldn't absorb information the same. High school was overstimulating to me, so the masking started kind of going down. I started becoming detached. All my worth that was caught up in these things was being stripped away from me as my grades started to slip. So I fell into very heavy suicidal depression, existential crises that I didn't even know were existential crises because I was 14, 15 years old and not raised with yoga, meditation, spirituality. So I was going through all this stuff with no anchor, no branch, and no support from my family. We've gotten through it now. But yeah, basically, I ended up in and out of hospital throughout my adolescence, and that only made things worse. It was as a result of trying to leave my body. I ended up being hospitalized, institutionalized, and one thing about American psychiatric healthcare, you can't rely on it. That's not just a woo-woo spiritual Ayurvedic perspective. This is a very well-known sociological phenomenon. The American psychiatric system is failing us, and I was a victim of that. So I
Can I
spent
just ask, when you say institutionalized, can you just clarify what you mean by that?
yeah, so lack of a better word, I was in and out of things like psych wards, things they call partial hospital programs where, you go home, but that's all you really do. Other than that, you go to this program that is effectively a hospital. You're not allowed to really see your friends when you're in a certain level of crisis mode.
Mm.
There are a lot of systemic issues and reasons as to why people, particularly young adults and young women with mental health issues, are treated so kind of animalistically. There are a lot of reasons, but again, that's for a more
Mm.
academic podcast, and we'll get into my education, I know, in the future, in the next questions. But yeah, so that was my adolescence. I wasn't really allowed to be a teenager. And I tried. I would sneak out of the house when I wasn't in hospital, and I would commit all these, hedonistic acts. I would over sexualize myself, trying to feel something. I would drink a whole bunch. I would be smoking weed and using anything else I could get my hands on, and hanging out with the wrong people, trying to get older men's attention. All this material attachment, just trying to feel something. All my friends are getting ready they're taking these IB or international baccalaureate, like college level courses, and I'm in and out of the hospital, transferring schools, like all this stuff is happening, when all the while the reason that I felt so bad was because I wanted help so that I could feel more normal. So it's this cycle. And then so there came a point where I did kind of stop actively destroying myself, because I realized I cannot end up back in like a hospital type program. This is clearly doing more harm than good. I've been treated like a lab rat for years. Like my brain is not working. I I can't do that. I'm just repeating the same cycle over and over again. And I can't leave my body, or in other words, trigger warning, kill myself. I can't do that because I'm going to hurt the people that I love. And I can at least understand that people love me. Um, so then I stopped being actively destructive, but I was still I tried to go to college. I got so anxious during finals because I had no support leading up to that college, or university as they call in the UK. I had such little support, such little preparation, that I freaked out. I flunked out. I got alcohol poisoning on purpose in order to like flunk out of my finals, my first semester at university. And it was just, at that point, I was like, well, I'm not ending up back. Yeah, again, I'm not going to try and leave my body or anything, but there was no other purpose other than, if I try and do something to myself, it's not going to work, and I'm going to end up back here, and I'm going to hurt my parents. I had no other reason to live. I had no other goal in mind, no other dharma in mind, no connection. And then, so I was extremely hypersexual. I think that was, and to this day is, my biggest anartha, just wanting attention, wanting to be seen, and confiding in men for that. So I came back 3 years ago from a hookup that, let's just say, was very hedonistic in nature, and I hated being there. Nothing was not consensual, but it was this weird shakti inside me, something like, all of a sudden I was doing this thing that I've been doing time and time and time again, like different person every week, pretty much, on Tinder and things like that. And I was like in the middle of sleeping over at these people's house, and I just like woke up in the middle of the night and I started freaking out, but it was a different sort of freak out. It wasn't a normal panic attack in which I would just drink and then do the next thing. I was freaking out. I was like, what the F am I, like, I'm not even attracted to like this person. And I'm not attracted to the last person either. And I wasn't attracted to the person before. Why am I doing this? What is happening? What is going on? What am I trying to access here? And I remember going home like as soon as I could, and taking the subway back from Brooklyn, which is all the way on the other side, to New Jersey. Just feeling this energy, something, couldn't describe it. Definitely couldn't say it was spiritual. I didn't know that. but I was freaking out. Like, what the heck is this? Who the heck am I? Why am I searching for feeling in all of the wrong places? And what are the right places? Like, what? And then I came home, had a complete breakdown. No one was home. My parents weren't home. I remember reaching out to my dog, Bodhisattva, for a hug. And he just like ran away. And I was like, I don't even have my dog now. I'm purposeless. I'm useless. I have nothing. I have no one. I don't have these men or women. I never had these people I was hooking up with. I don't even have myself. What? And I broke down. And then it sort of came to like a do or die, like this path was presented in front of me of either you can keep going in these cycles, the cyclical nature that is actively destroying your soul, or drop your body, or you can figure out something. You can figure out what this breakdown means. You can connect to something. And then I felt a voice, and this wasn't like a hallucinatory, this was very grounded in self. At the time, before I believed in Krishna or God, it was my higher self. I felt my higher self speaking to me. Kind of my soul emerged for the first time in possibly ever. And I felt myself looking down at myself. And I was saying, like, Belle, you have to love yourself. If you don't now, you have to learn how. You have to learn how to depend on things and people greater than yourself. You have to learn from the great saints and sages. You have to explore spiritual paths. Like, yes, you've been taught that religion is all evil, but like you have to look to something that you haven't looked to yet. You have to find the good in these teachings, because the things you've reached for, they're not working. I didn't know anything about like material world. I wasn't thinking about that stuff, but just that something, I was literally saying things to myself that I could hardly understand. Like, you have to take care of yourself, and you have to love yourself and find yourself. And you're going to do that. Part of the way you're going to do that is by exploring the spirit, exploring the soul. Because right now, this is me, your soul, speaking to you. And I was hugging myself in that moment. And that same day, I was listening to the Rise EP by Willow Smith and John V. Harrison. And I'd listened to that EP for a year or so, or almost a year. But again, like, I just liked Willow Smith. I had no idea what any of the mantras in there meant, and I never tried to discover. But that day I was listening to this EP after this like complete dark night of the soul awakening. And I figured, well, might as well start here. What does Hare Krishna mean? Like, who are these white people in Indian clothes? Like, like, what? I might as well start here, because clearly this album has been giving me solace, consolation for months. I just haven't paid attention. And now I'm paying attention. So let's start here. And I went down a rabbit hole. And then I found the Bhakti Center. Yeah.
Wow. So
Sorry,
that was, well,
long-
firstly, thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate that was quite a condensed version of lots of things. But I really appreciate you sharing some of those really personal issues and topics. So I think you said that kind of spiritual awakening happened or started around 3 years ago. So you then decided you were going to go and find the Bhakti Center. Tell us a bit about what happened then, in terms of, you went in and just sat for a while, or you got heavily involved, or you went in and said, hey, I want to start doing seva. I mean, what was the first stage of that relationship with the movement?
It was a great question. And again, I apologize for, I don't know how much time I took up with the whole backstory to get here.
Don't worry about the time. Your story is really important. Feel free to tell us anything you want or you don't want.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Very good. So now we've gotten to the point of Bhakti Center. I found the Bhakti Center through looking up information about our dear Janavi Harrison, Janavi Jivana. So I found out about Bhakti Center as this spiritual home. I discovered what kirtan is, and I started listening to kirtans first. So COVID was still going on, so events were limited. Things just started opening back up. So for about a month, 2 months, I was practicing what I knew how to at home. And then they opened back up this program, which everyone knows me. They know it's my favorite program, Thursday Night Kirtan Ki Jai. So it's basically for everyone from people who are twice initiated to sannyas, to brahmachari, to complete newcomers. Everyone comes and congregates. So I went to Thursday Night Kirtan, and one of the first people who smiled at me was one of my very best friends. Oh, wow, this is going to make me emotional. I apologize. Her name is Gopi Leela Devidasi. If you're listening to this, I love you forever. But she was Emily at the time. She was doing Save on the Altar, and she looked back at me and smiled. And I'll be honest, when I went in as a skeptic. Yeah, I was listening to kirtan and learning about Krishna on my own time, but it was all conceptual for me still. I was still considering myself an atheist. I was treating my spiritual exploration as a sort of mental health journey. Like, what about these paths have made people feel better? What brings people together? What about religion works? And on top of that, I'm a sociologist's daughter. I study sociology. I want to be a social worker, and I love writing investigative journalism is my favorite sort of writing. So I kind of came in with nefarious intentions, if I'm being honest. I don't think anyone at Bhakti Center knows that. So I came in, wanting to take in kirtan, but it was selfish. It was all for myself. And it was for my mental health and for investigative purposes. And then the devotees won me over. Without ranting too much, the devotees completely won me over very quickly. So yeah, Emily Gopi Leela, she smiled at me, and I was like, oh, that's so sincere. There's so much love in her heart. I wonder how that. So then, journalist brain, I wonder how that works for her. I wonder, like, what spell she's under, what Kool-Aid she drank, as we say in America. And then another friend who I haven't seen in a while, but I appreciate and love dearly, Anupam Das, a great book distributor, great young preacher. Him and his wife, Mani Manjari, all glories to them. Were some of the next people I met that night. It turned out Mani Manjari had a mutual friend who's my childhood best friend. Crazy stuff. So all this stuff was kind of falling into place, and I was getting so much sincerity and mercy. And I was still an investigator. I still was like, clearly this is working for them, but like it can't be real. Like what is real? But in my mind, it can't be real. It's just everyone is nice to each other and they bond over this stuff. And then they invited me to their Sunday program. I went to their Sunday program in the park outdoors, did a couple hours of kirtan there. The rest is history. I started going to the Bhakti Center and related events, basically like up to 4 times in a week, which is a lot for me coming from Jersey. And
how long is the journey?
It's about 16 to 90 to 2 hours, depending on commute.
Wow. That's real commitment and devotion and dedication, going 3 to 4 times a week.
In all fairness, thank you. But I was in the city a lot anyway, doing musical activities, and a lot of friends were there already. But I was, going out of my way more than I ever thought I would for spiritual purposes. So I dived in pretty quickly, but I remember kind of trying to pathologize it. Like, I would be sitting in kirtan trying to simultaneously focus on my mental health and, be immersed in the kirtan for myself, and also figure out what the heck was going on, like why it was working and why it was working for other people, and asking people questions and kind of interviewing people for my own selfish reasons. Like, it was this weird dissonance that was going on. And I think like the third or fourth kirtan I was in, I was thinking about this and I was like, well, I guess God can be this presence that works for people. Like, maybe that is God. Maybe all of this is God. And like, I didn't know much about Shastra. I didn't know, we are all parts and parcels of the divine. I didn't know that at that time. But I sort of started to understand that, just feeling that, like, maybe this is all part of what God is. I can get behind that, but it was still very agnostic, very inquisitive. And I thought that everyone else felt the same way, because we were just doing kirtans at that point. No one was forcing me into really heavy scripture classes. So I think I thought that Krishna was a conceptualization. I thought that Krishna was a metaphor, mythology, same as, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. I thought it was mythology. And I thought that we were using these stories and these characters, these personalities, to better understand how to serve each other, and how to be good for ourselves and each other. But I didn't believe that there was a divine source. And that took a while. In fact, that was still sort of the belief system that I held, flash forward 6 or so months, when I moved into the ashram. But yeah, I remember Mani Manjari, she asked me if I wanted to read Krishna book with her. After a few months, she wanted to get me a little more into Shastra and into the books. And I just remember, like, she was reading the introduction, 5,000 years ago, this happened, like Krishna appeared and he was born of, just all these things that to someone who was an atheist 2 months ago, it's like, are you kidding me? So I remember specifically asking her, she was about to be initiated, poor thing. I probably offended her without meaning to. I was like, Minna, love you, Minna, Mani Manjari. I was like, but this is all a story, right? Like, this didn't happen. Like, this is mythology. And I was so serious. I was so sincere. And she was like, no, we believe that this happened. These are our scriptures, like, the Bible, like this happened. And I was like, no. I was so dumbfounded and so resistant, to the notion that a divine source in different forms, one of them being Krishna, the one who came into my life when I needed him most being Krishna, like the prospect of that being like somehow real, it was so beyond me. And so then rather than turning away or getting intimidated, I said, I want to live in the ashram and see if this makes any more sense if I live in the ashram. And so that first friend, Gopi Leela Devidasi, she was kind of in charge of the ashram at the time at Bhakti Center. It was going through some transition. There were some open beds. They were kind of trying to figure out what sort of model they wanted, how strict they wanted to go, how many people they wanted to serve, who was going to rent, who was going to do seva, how much sadhana. So I was kind of the guinea pig, I like to call it, at that time. Krishna's mercy really came through, because I definitely would not have been able to sustain a place in the ashram for a couple months, anywhere else, or under the belief system and the resistance that I was under. But luckily, they just so happened to need people to serve. And I think people picked up on my sincerity. Like they saw that I was just so resistant, but I was so desperate to like get with it and figure it out because it was working. Like the more programs I attended, the more my heart softened and the less I wanted to die. So I was like so desperate to figure out why and how this is working. So I think that sincerity was picked up upon, and I was able to get a place in the ashram despite my agnosticism at that point. Yeah.
So how long did you end up staying or living in the ashram for?
So unfortunately, only about 2 months. This was still, the Omicron strain of COVID kind of made dramatic headlines once again, returned, and I was willing to stay longer, but my parents were very, very, they were like, you're not even boosted yet, in terms of vaccines. I was an adult. I guess I could have defied them and stayed, but I don't know. My parents were like, you have to come home. We're picking you up. Like, pack up your things. We're coming tomorrow. We're giving you no other option. I think part of it was they were concerned because I was starting to actually, get with the program and chant and
And maybe they were using the COVID pandemic as an excuse to a scientific excuse to get you out of a religious institution.
they won't admit that, and perhaps not on my mom's behalf because she's actually as anti-theistic as she is. Ironically, she had a lot of respect for the Hare Krishnas because she knows that it's just she's an empiricist, and I've only gotten better since meeting the devotees. So I don't think my mom, at least not consciously, but yeah, I think somewhere in there was a like we're taking you out of this culty situation and bringing you home, and yeah, and I was miserable after that. I didn't want to go home at all. I still didn't know if I believed in Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. I still didn't accept Srila Prabhupada as guru, but I was like trying. And I was loving it, so I was
So
miserable.
my next question, I guess, you've kind of started to answer this a little bit. In terms of your parents, when you met the devotees at the Bhakti Center, and then you started to get involved, what were the views of your parents? Despite you being raised as a anti-theist, or they had a very strong disdain for religion. You don't just start going to the local church or the local synagogue. You start going to the Hare Krishna temple. What was their reaction?
I think so. My stepdad, growing up in America and also being a bit older than my mom, he and also being a deadhead, being big on the hippie scene when he was growing up. So he was kind of around when the Hare Krishnas started to infiltrate and preach at rock concerts, and when the Grateful Dead started to get involved, and the Beatles. He was there kind of for all of it. So he definitely had the same idea as many people in the 70s, like concerned parents and friends in the 70s. They were throwing people into vans and deprogramming them. And I mean, there's a lot of controversy, in all fairness, going on within ISKCON after Prabhupada left his body. So my stepdad knew about all of the kind of ISKCON controversy and the things that were happening to the devotees when he was growing up. So he had really poor preconceived notions. So he would have rather I gone to like either a Buddhist center or, if anything, a synagogue. But like, he was like, just go to yoga class. We'll pay for you to go to, I know these programs are free, but like, God, we'll pay for you to go to yoga. Like, just do yoga. Why does it have to be religious? Like, why does Krishna have to be in it? Why not Buddha? Buddhism is a theory, not a religion. Why can't you be a Buddhist? As so many people like to think without understanding the depths of Buddhism. my mom sort of had that same thing, like, why don't you just be a Buddhist? Like, you named your dog after like Buddhist terminology, bodhisattva. Like, come on, everything you're saying just sounds like Buddhism. You can be an atheist and be a Buddhist. Come on. So there was kind of that sort of resistance. But again, my mom, she saw that kirtan was working. I guess so long as I didn't preach too much, so long as I didn't talk about God too much, if I talked more about kirtan as a form of bhakti yoga, and I focused on those words, yoga, mantra meditation, if I focused on those westernized, secularized words, my mom was very supportive. Like, thank God she's doing that. It's healthy. She's getting fit and she's exercising and she's chanting and she's going to yoga things. Like, good for her. My stepdad was like, no, Leanna, that's my mom's name. Like, these are the Hare Krishnas. Like they're a cult, and all. So kind of mixed on both parents' sides. My mom, when I told her I made the decision to try the ashram, she was like, okay, you have to, go to school and figure out, now that you're like not suicidal anymore, we got to get you back in school when you're done. Or like while you're there, start thinking about what you want to do career wise, other than music, because I was making some money off of music, but I was getting to a point in my mental health where it was like, we can start focusing on going back to college and things like that. So my mom was like, as long as you're keeping that in mind and this Krishna stuff, quote unquote, is helping you gain the stability to have longer term material goals, then like, awesome, go live there, figure yourself out, come back stronger, and you'll be a good student again. and like, it's working. And my stepdad was like, I actually didn't tell him until like a couple days before I moved in, even though my mom knew. She was like, yeah, let's not tell him until it's too late to turn back, because we know he's not going to be happy. And they did argue about it a bit. Yeah. And they still do to this day.
Just I always find it very rude asking someone how old they are, but you're in your 20s now, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm 23.
You're 23, so they're still arguing now, even though you're 23, over your involvement with the Hare Krishnas. Or have things got a bit better now?
No, better in the sense that I think they're coming to a place of radical acceptance. Like, either you can't stop me. I've done all the investigative reporting. I tried to do the kirtan and be an atheist. I tried to argue with devotees. Like, believe me, I went in with all my critical senses and I still have them. Like, you want to debate about the controversy of organized religion? I'm right there with you. I'm studying that stuff. I want to write my thesis on the controversies within organized religion. Like, I'm here. I'm thinking critically. My mental health is better. My physical health is better. My spiritual health is like, it's kind of like, take it at face value. Like, that's what I say to my parents. Like, you don't have to believe this. It would be awesome if everyone, believed in what they believed in and chanted kumbaya, but like, you don't have to. But here I am, doing leaps and bounds better than before, like in every sense of life. And when they see that and realize that, there's a level of peace and acceptance. Like, okay, we would have rather she not gone down a spiritual or religious path to get here, but she's doing better. So this is what
and they can see it's made a difference to your mental health, for example.
Exponentially, and they see that for sure. I think right now, what they fear, what something they can agree on, my stepdad way more, he's way more stuck in those preconceived notions. My mom is much more nuanced, but still, and I can validate this and discuss this with them. They're afraid of spiritual bypassing, I think, at this point. They don't know what that term even means because they're not spiritual. But I think they're afraid that they know that this works for my mental health. They know that this has gotten me to a place of functionality. But the thing is, I don't think they want to accept that there are times in which I have to commit to my spiritual practice and take it very seriously. So as I said before, it was one thing when I could kind of just go to programs and debrief my mom and say, I'm going to kirtan, meditation, I'm going to yoga. You know, generally speaking, when I was, and that it was one thing when I was agnostic about it. But, you know, as I get deeper in my sadhana, they see me chanting when I'm spending time with them in the car ride. If we're not conversing meaningfully, I'm going to be chanting a lot of the time. They're gonna. I have different dietary restrictions than they do. They ask me, why can't you just eat what we eat, or why can't you just find something at this restaurant? And it's like, well, I could, but it's gonna be French fries. Like I'm gonna just prepare my food at home. And then they're like, okay, well, you're not gonna offer it, are you? Like, you know, offering Krishna, like you're why are you praying over your food? Like you don't actually believe, as this is like almost a weekly conversation.
You have
So
siblings. I think you mentioned you have siblings.
I
They're,
have three stepsisters, and they're just as confused as me. I mean, as my parents. They're just as confused as my parents. But I
they're,
don't.
they're, they're all younger than you, are they?
They're all older,
Okay.
so they all live outside. The one who I did live with for the longest, who I'm the closest with, who understands me very personally, is Ali. Yeah, she's kind of in the same boat as, I don't think she actually cares. I'll pull up. I'll meet up with her in the city. She works right by the Bhakti Center. I'll have tilak on. I'll have my beads. I'll be watching a show with her and, you know, finishing up rounds. And I think she's just kind of like, she gets it because she's been through similar mental health issues.
Hmm.
So if it works for me, she's not even going to question it. She doesn't think too deeply about it. Um, yeah. But with my parents, I think a weekly discussion that we have is, well, you don't actually believe in blue babies, do you? That's a question that someone or other, either my mom or my stepdad asks, almost as if to provoke me, and that I don't appreciate. You know, sometimes it's good fun, and my mom and I end up having real meaningful discourse about what my beliefs mean and why. And she can't agree with them, but she can intellectually understand and appreciate the Hindu philosophy. She can appreciate bhakti, from, you know, an intellect, kind of like how I appreciated it when I started.
Hmm.
So sometimes it's in good fun that the discourse will be opened up with this. Oh, you don't believe
Hmm.
in babies, do you? Sometimes, though, and more so from my stepdad than my mom, it really is very provocational. And that's when it becomes very difficult, to be grounded on this path, living at home. I get into some heated debate.
And in terms of now, today, you've been around the movement for 3 years or so. How are you doing now spiritually? You know, you've mentioned that kirtan's making a difference. It's been good for your mental health. But how are things going for you spiritually? That's a bit of an open-ended question, but how are things?
Spiritually, things are sweet. Things are sweet. I know a lot of the conversation as of thus far has been kind of material, like how did I get here? So all the
Hmm.
murky material stuff. But now I can enter devotee space. Spiritually, life is so tough. Krishna tests me so much, but I get why. It's because I don't know what I did in my past lives, but they couldn't have been good. And I mean, I've questioned him so much, I've turned away so much. But not that's my fault, but like Krishna is testing me so hard. So materially, life kind of sucks. And but spiritually, just having knowing that there's this supreme, as Achyuta Gopi says, I think we all know and love Achyuta Gopi, all the devotees. She calls Krishna supreme bestie, supreme lover, supreme bestie. Having Krishna, because disclaimer for all the agnosticism I talked about, now I fully accept Krishna as supreme personality of Godhead. Krishna came to me. Krishna is my form. I believe in Krishna. So it's so sweet to be sure. It's so sweet to be so sure, and to be able to have even I got a little heated talking about my family, but like even to be able to have these debates, no, to be able to say, excuse me, to be able to not have these debates, because at first it was more so heated, angry debates, like this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to practice, like trying to prove, trying to make others understand. But now, as of the past 6 months or so, being able to say, like, I don't want, like, if my stepdad says, oh, religion's the root of all evil, like, this is horrible that you've come to religion, being able to say, I'm not trying to prove to you why I believe in God, because I can't even really explain it fully to myself. Faith is a feeling, and I have the right to my feelings, and I have the right to act on my feelings. And the ways in which I have acted on my feelings have brought me closer to this divine connection, have softened my heart and made me feel more capable. And when I don't feel capable, when everything is falling apart, or seems like everything materially is falling apart, knowing that that's because there is a source that I am connected to that has his best interests, my best interests in heart. Like knowing that everything is happening for a reason, and not only philosophically knowing that, but feeling that in my heart. Like, and being able to say to friends and family, like, I won't debate on this. We can talk about it. I'd love to tell you about the things that help strengthen my belief. I'd love to bring you to a kirtan, or a soul talk, or a sangha. I'd love to, but to debate on my soul, like, and my connection to divinity, that's not up for debate. I can't. I know I come from an empiricist family, but this isn't an empirical matter. To be able to say that is so, it's so liberating. It's so liberating in the face of so much suffering that I deal with to this day. It's so liberating to have a supreme best friend, and to feel that supreme best friend as an omnipotent force, as a supreme personality. To have that supreme personality, it's just, Krishna saved my life. I mean, Krishna literally saved my life. I could have killed myself if I didn't kind of come to the realizations that I did. And sure, I didn't know it was Krishna at the time. Yeah, I did the work with the knowledge I had. I said, I'm going to explore, and I'm still an atheist, but that was part of my plan, Krishna's plan for me in this life. Like, Krishna did that. That higher voice that I felt that I couldn't describe, that I felt like was me going crazy, like, that was the divine. And maybe not for everyone it's Krishna. For some it's Jesus, Buddha, universe, source, whatever you want to call it. For some people it's the rejection of that source that makes them feel better. Again, atheism is a belief, a system as well. But like, it was, for me, it was God in the form of Krishna. And so that is the path I'm now committed to lifelong. I pray. I pray. I
Well,
really.
I really admire your enthusiasm, and it's quite infectious. I can kind of feel it, even though you're thousands of miles away. I can feel it through the Zoom airwaves. You know, that you're just this kind of um, love for Krishna consciousness. I can really feel that it's changed your life, you know, in terms of the stuff that you experienced as a teenager, you know, the stuff that you went through, you're looking for love and acceptance in certain places. And actually, you find it in the source of life. You find it in Krishna. You find it where the best place to find it in Krishna consciousness. So I find it really inspiring, your story. And I was just thinking actually about 10 minutes ago, it's really useful. The Bhakti Center is just called the Bhakti Center instead of the Hare Krishna Temple or, you know, or Mandir or something like that. So, because it really, I guess it's to some extent, it's just helped your parents. So she's at the Bhakti Center, you know, Bhakti is a form of yoga, you know, unless they come in and see what actually happens, they're not going to know what's really going on.
And plenty of people, I mean, they once they come, they get an idea, but Bhakti Center does a wonderful job at what a lot of people call bridge preaching.
Mm.
So they've created a wonderful model. Bhakti Center was started by His Holiness Radhanath Swami, and now it's being run by Dayal Guranga and a team of wonderful devotees. They're doing a really good job at that sort of subtle introduction, not hiding things, not kind of soft selling you, and then all of a sudden you have to do this, this, and this, but really gently introducing people, because they have non-sectarianized yoga classes, asana yoga classes as well. They have a lot of programs that a lot of people who don't even know like who Krishna is come to, and then you know they can be as curious as they want, or they can be
So
where they're at.
is the Bhakti Center quite an active, busy place?
Oh yes, oh yes, it is. Unfortunately, I had to quit because of personal and health reasons last year, but I briefly worked in management, reception management at Bhakti Center. It was brief, but I can tell you with confidence, so busy, so busy.
Mm.
The growth is insane. They're always adding new programs. The amount of conversations I've had with people, and this is one of my favorite things to do. It is my favorite thing to do. Just, I love preaching. I love preaching without being annoying. I love preaching in a way that I love trying to be empathetic, and trying to meet people where they're at. And I love trying to understand where people are coming from. I've spoken to and I've preached to so many people who like have no idea what's going on when they walk in. Like, I heard there's something like a kirtan going on today. There's a kirtan. What is that? I just came from, I just did yoga class. I just did yoga, and I heard this was a yoga place. But what's this thing with the drums? It's a kirtan going on. Can you tell me more about that? My favorite thing is talking to people in that sort of position of, I didn't even expect to walk into this. It's so sweet seeing people's reactions.
Wow. Just to clarify, when you say that you had to quit the Bhakti Center, you haven't quit completely, have you?
Oh, no, I just mean I stepped down from my role on the payroll, but I still do
Okay.
seva whenever I can, and this is my spiritual home. And I'm still going there as much as possible. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because I felt quite sad actually when you said you'd step down. But just to clarify, you're still going because it sounds like a great place actually. It sounds like lots of stuff's happening there to attract particularly younger people. And I imagine kind of young Americans, you know, Western people.
Yes, very much that. Like there's a huge Indian community. It's really interesting. I'm getting to learn. My faith was definitely strengthened by the variety of association at
Mm.
the Bhakti Center, getting to see what God means to different people,
Mm.
how strict or how lenient people are at different points of their journeys. There's a huge variety, and that really helped strengthen my faith. Um, I'd say it's about 50-50 in terms of Indian versus Western. But then within that Indian community, there are a lot of younger Indians who perhaps turned away from Hinduism in their upbringing and now we're kind of easing themselves back in. So maybe they do follow the regs, maybe they don't, maybe they chant 16 rounds, maybe they don't. It's none of our business, really. You don't, unless you want to talk about it openly, it's not really our business. But the point is that it's a community. They kind of hang out, they foster that community. So I end up hanging out with a lot of the younger Indian community, because I guess I resonate with them in a lot of ways, because I'm also in school, quite academic, and kind of coming back. And then within the Western community, it's also true that there's a divide. There are your initiated devotees, your twice initiated devotees, and then you have people who, again, like all the time. One seva that I've started taking up is hospitality for Thursday night kirtan, that big event. So that's all about just explaining to people who are coming from yoga, like, what the heck is going on. And then those people often become more involved. They want to take on seva. I do know I'm lucky enough to have grown with a few people. Like, we started going to things after COVID, like around the same time 3 years ago. And now they're like seva captains, or they work for the Bhakti Center, or they did an ashram stay, or people who I've really grown with. So that's been, yeah, such a variety of association.
It's great, actually. It's wonderful to hear about what's happening at the Bhakti Center, and to hear that so many people are going.
Yeah.
I mean, New York is quite a cosmopolitan city anyway, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
I mean, I have to confess, I've never been to the United States.
Wow,
Maybe
really?
it's just never happened. I mean, the furthest west I've been is Galway, which is on the west coast of the Republic of Ireland. I've been to Asia a lot, Europe a lot, the Middle East a lot, Africa, but I've just never been to North or South America.
Wow.
But I know
How
that,
exciting.
yes, well, at some point, if it's meant to be, it will happen. But I know that New York is obviously quite liberal, progressive. I guess politically a little bit left leaning.
Definitely.
I imagine it always returns Democrats in political elections,
Right.
stuff like that. So I can imagine the type of place that it is, at the Bhakti Center. And I'm really pleased that you live quite close to it, or relatively close to it, so you can go and you can experience it and you can kind of get involved, which is great. Can we change the discussion a little bit now? I want to talk about the other stuff you're doing in your life. You've mentioned a few times about being at school, so in Britain, terminology is bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
So for me, that means that you're under 18 and you're at school, but I know that you're not. I think school can mean something different in the United States.
I
In your
agree.
in your message to me when we were setting up this podcast, you described yourself as a pre-law student, teacher, and aspiring social worker. So I imagine, so in Britain we would say that you're at university.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, if you're still at school, it's like, wow, you've redoing all those years because you're really struggling. I hope you're not struggling, by the way. So tell us a bit about that. What's about your life as a pre-law student, teacher, and aspiring social worker? Tell us all about it.
So, yeah, I'm glad this will save me on the tirade now that I gave such a comprehensive background about, growing up in school in the earlier questions. That's going to save me time here. So it works out, it evens out. So as I explained, I had a very difficult time with school because I went from being a perfectionist and struggling and then nothing. So for a while, I wasn't doing much of anything academically. Like, I flunked out of my first semester at university. And that was when I was 18. I'm 23 now, so 5 years ago. So after I found Bhakti, well, as I found Bhakti, my plan, as my mom said, let's start thinking about a material prospects now. So as I was entering the ashram, I started studying trade, actually. So in America, I don't know if the terminology is different, but we have university, which is 4 years, and then you go to graduate school, law school, whatever it may be. And then we have trade schools where you pick up something where you don't necessarily need university. It's more specified. So I decided one other saving grace of mine had been fitness. So I decided I want to become a certified personal trainer. So I was starting trade school as I was entering the ashram to become a certified personal trainer. So I'm now a personal trainer by trade. So that is kind of an all-encompassing certification, at least here in the US. A lot of people think of like, oh, powerlifting, weightlifting. Then I guess Krishna doesn't want me to. Krishna was like, basically, Krishna said, that's cool and all, but you're not doing this for the right reasons. So I'm going to injure you. So you have to further think about your prospects. And I know that this was Krishna's arrangement. Like, it's so obvious, and I can like, there's a timeline to it too. Because like, one issue I struggled with in mental health is eating disorder, body image issues. And so at the same time that fitness helps me get physically fit, I did kind of cling to it as an obsessive thing. And I was lifting weights that were too heavy. I was exercising too much and not eating enough and things of that nature as I was studying to become a personal trainer. So within a month of me receiving my certification, my trade, finishing that schooling, I indefinitely herniated a disc. And the disc was like right where the nerves, it's hard to describe, but I trade. It's a chronic pain injury, and it's indefinite. I don't want to get surgery. All I can really do is my best, do my yoga, stretch, manage it. But I have a lot of nerve pain because I herniated the disc right where my nerve kind of blockings lie, pinched a lot of nerves. I have sciatica. I have like full body pain chronically.
So you're in pain all the time.
I don't like to think of it like that.
Sorry to kind of remind you if that's the case. We're having such a great conversation, and I've just kind of asked you if you're in pain all the time.
I'm gonna say no, but not in a bypassing way, more so in a, as you know, someone who is always poor but has things that make them happy is not always going to feel poor, you know. So I guess using that analogy, it's like the more you adapt, the more you manage, the less you really feel it. You become desensitized to an extent. There are times where I do just want to like throw in the towel, as we say in America. Like, just I get so frustrated because there are days where I do have to miss out on, like, I'll have committed to leading a kirtan in the city, and then I can't because I can't get myself together like in time because I'm just in too much physical and then accompanying mental anguish. And like, yeah, that happens, and I'm not always having a great time. Like I said, Krishna's putting me through a bunch of material tests, this being one of them, but I don't always think that I'm like actively in pain, especially as luckily I am educated in kinesiology and exercise science. So, you know, I'm my own physical therapist, and I was working. So I guess to get back to your question, like I was working in a physical therapy clinic because I couldn't train clients on injury. So I went into clinical administration instead, and I was managing physical therapy clinic for a while. So I learned a lot about how to manage my own condition there and things like that. But so yeah, I'm not always, like, I am, but I'm not always in pain, you know? Like, I don't want to play the victim, but I also don't want to be dismissive because for other devotees' sakes, I also want to very much validate anyone who's listening to this. If you are struggling right now, mentally, physically, both, that is very valid. You don't have to say that you're not in pain just because Krishna arranged it. Like Krishna arranged it, and you're allowed to feel the effects of it. You're allowed to feel the consequences of your itch. You're allowed to feel the effects of your pain. You're allowed to feel your pain. I firmly believe that feeling your feelings and feeling your pain is part of coming closer to that divine connection. So no, I'm not always in pain, but I don't want to be dismissive of it either.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I find you very inspiring in terms of what you're dealing with and how you're dealing with it. I was about to make a very stereotypical point then, and say as a typical man, which, and I don't, that sounds like a stereotypical point. I don't mean it to, but for example, for me, if I even just have toothache, I'm like, I can't do anything for the day, you know, because it's such a, and it's actually not a lot of pain, toothache. I mean, not that I ever get toothache a lot, but when I have toothache, I think, oh, you know, I'm completely out of it. I can't do anything. So when I hear that what you're going through, that me as someone who might moan every now and then about toothache or I don't know something hurting is completely
I'm going
irrelevant.
to.
You know, I actually hate toothache a lot. Okay, so let's just talk a bit more about you being a pre-law student. So you're studying law?
Yes, sorry, the pain. So that was to
Don't
say,
worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I went through the trade school with different intentions in mind, the exercise science, but since that didn't really work in the ways I wanted it to, I didn't enjoy being an office manager. You know, I wanted to train people. So then I started praying on like, okay, how can I actually serve? Like for some reason, like what can I do? What can I actually, and then it kind of came to me, like Krishna basically told me in my japa, like, you've always been smart. Like, Belle, you're such an academic. You're such, like, you're a writer. Like, I mean, it kind of just, it clicked. Like, I hadn't had, and I still at times don't have enough faith in myself to take the leap of going back to university. Because for context, by American schooling, I don't want to say trade school is easier than university, but it's much more clear cut. At least the program I went through, like it took a lot of faith in myself after all the school trauma to even do trade school. So university, I was like, that's just not something I'm going to do. I'm not cut out for it. I can't do it. But then I was sitting in my physical therapy office one day, chanting my rounds, and I was like, Krishna wants me to serve, and like I'm sort of doing that here, but I'm miserable. And like maybe there's, and then I started listening to Dharma talks, and I was like, oh, I got to figure out my Dharma. And then I realized I already had it figured out. And it involved going back to school. I just want to, I don't know exactly what I want to do. I mean, now I pretty much, I want to be a social worker, but at the time it's like, it's so broad. I wanted to go into psychology because I wanted to, I have a lot of experience in that. But like I also didn't want to, I don't know, I struggle with math and science, and there's a lot of stuff in my old major, like math requirements, science requirements were kind of beyond my intellectual capacity because of my disabilities. But I just knew I wanted to, again, like I wanted to understand the human mind and then serve it. Like I'd done so much to come to an understanding of how to help myself and my mind. I wanted to do that with other people. So my initial goal was I want to be a therapist. And that's kind of still my goal. So I was a psych major. Then the math got to be too much. So I switched. I was like, what do I do? So I switched to, now this program is actually way more in alignment with Dharma. It's called Justice Studies. And some consider it like a criminology program, but that's not how my school likes to look at it, because a lot of criminology programs in the US focus on the criminalization of individuals, and you know, people want to become parole officers. We focus on preventing crime through like retributive justice, punishing people, admonishing them. This program focuses more on systemic issues that have led us to chaos. So we don't shy away from the justice theory, critical race theory, theories that are very fragile in the US right now. And I think that's a very sad thing. People don't want to talk about the hard stuff. People don't want to talk about systemic oppressions and systems of oppression. But my major and the school that I've transferred to within my university specifically focuses on, it's a pre-law program because most people go into law, either civil rights law, disability rights law. But people also often afterwards go into social work, often becoming licensed therapists, but the focus is less on what we call the biomedical model of, what disorders does this person have? Diagnosis, medication, medication. How are they feeling about that? Have a nice day. It's less so that, and more so the focus is on understanding that a lot of disability is contextual. A lot of things that people go through that lead to crime, that lead to addiction, and so on and so forth, are products of systemic oppression. And so as a social worker, in theory, what I would be doing, I would be counseling others in some environment or other. I'm not quite sure what I want to specialize in yet, but the focus would be on keeping that understanding of these material differences that do lead to people struggling differently and having different needs, whether that be therapeutic, rehabilitative, just kind of a social justice oriented way of examining what we need to do in order to bring about more harmony and peace to people and communities.
Can you just explain for me and maybe some of our viewers and listeners, maybe it's just me, what do you mean by critical race theory?
Boy, I have to keep remembering that this is a cross-country podcast. So I'm gonna. Oy.
It's been really interesting listening to some of the terms that you've used to describe things. For example, what I should have said about 10 minutes ago, because a lot of the audience is British, not now, but every now and then. And to trade school, we would call a trade school a further education college or an FE college. So the system is a bit different, but that's exactly, we just don't call it that. And some of the other terms you've used, I should have just said, hey, what do you mean by that? But I think I know what you mean. And but critical race theory, I'm interested in. Well, I'm interested in what it means.
So, without creating too much, I'm a big fan of opening up the door to uncomfortable discussion without ruffling too many feathers. And again, this is a very fragile theory. So essentially, in a nutshell, things like critical race theory address systems of oppression, and systems of oppression can be racially, they have roots in things like race, in things like gender, in things like class. And there is an intersection at which all these marginalized identities meet. And there are facets of oppression at which all these marginalized identities share commonality. So critical race theory, I don't want to misquote or over-explain or under-explain or wrongly explain, but essentially it's a theory which examines these differences in how race impacts the opportunities that people have in society.
No, it makes sense to me. I'm not sure if I mean, maybe critical race theory is studied in the UK. I've just not heard of it before. It might be called something different, but it now I know what it means. Yeah, it's very, I say easy to understand. It's not necessarily easy, but now I understand what you mean. Okay, so when do you finish your studies? How far into it are you?
That's for Krishna to know and me to find out. Since I've been doing online courses for now, there's a lot of uncertainty. My parents just bought a house in Arizona, and funny enough, it definitely has nothing to do with the fact that my university is in Arizona. So I'm probably gonna matriculate in Arizona in person at some point. And that's going to impact the pace at which I finish things, because I'm going at a different pace now online, because I might take more credits one semester, fewer courses another semester, depending on what's going on with work, personal life, spiritual life. It kind of depends right now. I'm projected to finish in about a year and a half. I could finish in a year if I really just cracked down and just only focused on school. But sitting behind a screen with no friends in my house every day, all day, isn't exactly good for my mental health. I'm taking a little longer right now. I'm spacing it out a little more, taking like one class less than what would be considered full time. Some semesters I take more. Yeah, it really just varies. I don't really know where I'm gonna end up in terms of school, work, or ashram, all of things that I'm considering right now. So it's for Krishna to know.
And is there a devotee community in Arizona? Have you looked them up? Do you know who or where they are?
Yeah, there seems to be. I've been in touch with one of the temple care sort of coordinators in Phoenix, and she seems really sweet. I just made a post asking about this yesterday, asking if there's an ashram program, asking what the community is like. The thing is, in ISKCON US, I'm not sure how this is similar or different in the UK. Um, our coasts are super diverse, and certain bigger cities are super versatile in the services that they offer and the association that they offer. And then kind of in your smaller communities, they have become there's an NPR article titled "The Hare Krishnas are no longer white hippies. They're now Indian families who have returned to Hinduism." And that's kind of what you see in other states a lot of the time, a lot of communities, a lot of the Hare Krishna temples that aren't kind of bridge temples like the Bhakti Center are predominantly more traditionalist Indian communities, which I love. And at the same time, it's still it's the Gaudiya Vaishnav path. We're all aspiring for the same thing. In terms of, how many people are you going to be best friends with? How many people are going to understand why you came into the movement? Not every, it's good. There are probably some cultural differences there. So I'm a bit nervous, not because it's a majority Indian temple. I've been to plenty majority Indian temples, but again, as I said earlier, the variety of association and perspective and understanding has really strengthened my sadhana and strengthened my faith. And I am someone who needs sangha. I'm someone who very much so needs community. So I'm a bit nervous about the possibility of moving to Arizona where that's concerned. But I found out there's a great Bhakti Yoga club on Arizona State University campus. So if I end up there, I'm absolutely infiltrating. So that's something I look forward to. I've been speaking with the Phoenix Temple Care Coordinator about that. But I don't know. I don't know when I'm gonna end up there, because I am looking at prospect of some ashram programs here on the East Coast. Um, I am at a point right now mentally where I'm kind of struggling, and what I need is that reliance on Krishna. I do feel that I'm at a point where I can healthily make the decision to fully commit to seva and sadhana. So I'm looking at some places now. Yeah, but I also have a teaching job pending at the moment, like middle school, or I guess secondary school, like assistant teaching job that's pending. So like I I could work, but that's gonna mess with my sadhana, but I don't want my sadhana to mess with my material priorities.
Life is so complex, isn't it? I want to ask you one final question. So I sent some questions to you before we started broadcasting, and the other question, I think you might have answered it already, but it was around kind of your social life, in terms of we've talked about your spiritual life. You talked about your upbringing. You've been very forward in sharing with us your kind of mental health difficulties. But in terms of this idea of making a difference, in terms of standing up for the marginalized and particularly social political action, you've been involved with, I would imagine, it was interesting putting the questions together for you, because sometimes I know quite a bit about the devotee advance and I can kind of put some questions together. But from you, it was only what you told me and what you've kind of revealed on your social media channels. So I was looking through, trying to create these questions. So what can I ask her? And it was about so the question is, you're passionate about making a difference in terms of standing up for the marginalized, in participating in social and political action to bring about change. Why is that? Why are you passionate about it?
Well, that might be the simplest question to answer. I go into so much, socio-political discussion in another format, but in terms of connecting that to, the answer is service. The answer is seva. And it's so interesting to me how things like socio-political matters are often shied away from or dismissed. Our differences are often not given full credit in Bhakti Yoga. At the same time, over-identification with our differences does lead to material suffering. We know this as per Shastra. But it's really interesting because dismissing these differences leads to social and political unrest under our current material world circumstances. So by kind of finding that sweet spot, finding the right way in which we can open up and foster dialogue about our differences and what those differences mean, and that, hey, if you're a white-bodied devotee who hasn't struggled with much personally or financially or mentally or physically, that doesn't mean that you're the villain. That doesn't mean that your privilege is being attacked. That simply means perhaps listen to someone. If someone comes forward and says, I'm a female-bodied devotee of color, and I have been treated this way, either within the Vaishnava community or outside, it means listen. It means listen and serve in the ways that you can. Yeah, it really just comes down to service. I really believe that I want to say social issues. I don't want to even use the word social and political issues, because people get the wrong idea when they think of politics. They think of dividing into us versus them, hyperpolarization, especially in the US.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've observed on the news and what I've read, I think the political system, the political environment in America is more polarized than it is in the UK. I mean, we have differences of opinions here,
Yeah.
and there are certainly divides, but I don't think it's as divided as it is in the United States.
Yeah, and absolutely. And my goal isn't to be a peace, love, kumbaya bipartisan advocate for anything, because
Did you say peace, love, kumbaya?
yes.
You said that earlier on, and I just wondered, what does it mean? Because I think of that hymn, Kumbaya, my lord.
Oh my gosh. Again, it's the cultural. So it's, yeah. So basically, a lot of Americans, when they kind of make fun of people who are trying to spiritually bypass or create a false sense of harmony without addressing
Yeah.
issues that might be going on, and oftentimes a smirk reaction will be like, to the Hare Krishnas, for example, like something my parents have said before, like, oh, now you're gonna go live on the cow farm and just like hold hands and sing kumbaya all day. Like it's kind of a way of
I
saying
thought
like,
that
oh,
was what you meant. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I believe that in order to dismantle this over-attachment to political systems and to material over-identifications, in order to truly obtain like harmony in bhakti, in order to navigate the material world, we have to navigate material struggles. And those are real struggles. Sure, they're not real spiritually. Krishna doesn't want us to over-identify with him, but because we're humans, we have over-identified with him. We've created teams. We've created these systems again of oppression. We've created things like humans have created things like slavery and segregation and gender discrepancy, wage gap, our prison system, and in my educated opinion, corrupt nature of our prison system. That was man-made. In order to transcend material nature, we have to navigate material struggles in as harmonious of a way as possible. And I guess to quote a devotee, once I kind of asked about how to do that a couple of years ago when I was living in the ashram. I felt really lost as to how to do that because I was a very angry social justice advocate, always posting angrily, always wanting to fight. And then this devotee, the devotee was Anupam Das, who was also one of the first that I met. He said, I guess what you got to consider is, when you're speaking up about something, am I trying to make a point or am I trying to make a difference? And I think we have gotten, whether we're trying to preach to others, preach Srila Prabhupada's path, whether we are trying to preach bhakti, yoga, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or whether we're trying to preach a political view, whether we are trying to infuse Shastra into our political view, there has to be that question. Are we trying to make a point that serves us? Or are we trying to make a difference that serves broader populations? And in order to really gauge that, we have to educate ourselves. We have to listen to people's stories and where they come from. And we have to channel our empathy in that listening. We have to listen empathetically. And that's how we educate ourselves. And I think that also comes down to, this is kind of my call to action within ISKCON and within Vaishnav Sangha. Let's have more discussions like that. Let's try to make difference rather than point. Let's not be so scared either that we don't talk about these things or that we hardly touch upon these issues at all. Let's encourage more LGBT Sangha. Let's encourage Sangha that is exclusive to devotees of color. Let's encourage topics like the prison system and structural racism and sexism. Let's encourage Sangha in which we connect our Shastra, in which we connect this wonderful scriptures, these stories about navigating these things. Let's see where we can apply this philosophy in navigating our material circumstances right now, and in doing so trying to help those who need help.
I feel like I'm sitting in a lecture hall and you're giving a very passionate lecture about social justice and social harmony. And I agree with you, by the way, with mostly everything you've just said, in terms of, particularly in terms of listening to one another. I absolutely get kind of emotionally, philosophically, spiritually, I think that we're not the body. I get that. That was one of the main things that attracted me to Krishna consciousness. But at the same time, we need to recognize that there are differences in the material world, and we need to kind of celebrate that around the spirit of trying to learn from one another. Absolutely. So I am obviously in this life appearing as a white male. I'm a white man in this life. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with a friend, many years ago, actually. And very naively, I said, oh, there isn't much racism in the UK. Well, you know, I've never seen or experienced racism. And he said, well, yeah, but Nathan, you're a white man. You're in the least discriminated group of people in the world. I mean, I don't know if that's statistically true, but it probably is, that white men are the group of people that are least discriminated against. You know, we are paid well.
Of course, it depends on class and
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the reason why we're having this conversation was that the time in the UK, there's a lot of heated tension around race. I can't remember what was going on in the news, but there was things going on. And literally a couple of days later, I was driving through London, and I don't have a particularly flash car, by the way. I'm now driving a van, and I had my window down because it was hot. And these boys, these black boys, just shouted at me, "White privilege." And I had no idea why they were shouting white privilege. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've never, you know, what's going on here, you know? And I mean, nothing else happened after that. But they obviously saw me as someone who was privileged because I'm white, you know, and I just find that experience very interesting. And when you talk about therefore listening to one another, I mean, I've always been of that viewpoint anyway. We need to listen to one another and support people's diversity. You know, you would have seen over the last 88 episodes, I've had a real range of guests on this podcast.
And that's why as I reached out to you, I said I'm a fan.
Yeah, we have a growing number of fans, and thank you to Belle for being one of them. For example, I've had at least that I'm aware of, 3 people that are part of the trans community. You know, may have been more. I don't ask people when they come on this podcast, oh, are you the same gender now as you were when you were born? I don't ask people that question. But in terms of at least 3 guests that have come and we've talked about that, we've had another conversation about several about LGBT issues, you know, so we've in terms of the races of people, in terms of what their heritage is, we've had quite a few Jewish people on this show. We've had people of Black heritage, quite a lot of Indian heritage as well. So I've tried to celebrate diversity in through the types of people that come on this show. And I think I mean, you know what? I don't remember everything everyone tells me because I can't remember. But certainly within the last 15 episodes, we've had someone else that's had Russian heritage.
Oh.
I can't remember who it was, but because I don't remember everything. I write quite a bit down, but not everything. So, and I love that diversity. You know, I want there to be a Hare Krishna movement which is inclusive as we possibly can be. So if anyone looks at the Hare Krishna Project website, we know we've got a section on values. What are our values? One of our founding values is inclusion. We want to be inclusive as possible if people want to be included. So once that's the other thing, we say that not everybody wants to be included, and we're inclusive of that choice as well.
That's beautiful. I have to say, like, I know I just gave a little bit of a mini lecture, but that wasn't at you at all.
No, it wasn't.
I so appreciate your service with this podcast. That's why I admire this podcast and your work so much, because it truly is. It's the exact kind of service that I'm talking about. I can't say you're doing so much more than I am, and it's not about comparison. I'm just a student right now trying to get my life together. but you know, these are my values, and these are the sorts of changes that you are making within this movement are the sorts of, and through the medium through which you are doing that, I'm inspired. I'm inspired by your service. Inclusivity is the first thing I learned about in justice theory, and you really embody it. And the fact that you say you don't ask things like, oh, what gender were you born to? You don't force people to be included if they don't want to be. It sounds like you're taking your, you know, supposed privilege, and you are doing exactly what you ought to be doing with it. Like, you are serving so many people who otherwise might not feel like they have a voice within spiritual community. So thank you so much for your service.
Thank you for your kind words. I do really appreciate it. And what I've seen and experienced over the last 2 years is when I've put my head above the parapet and started to kind of speak out and stand up for the marginalized and provide a voice for the voiceless. It's resulted in quite a lot of people getting in touch with me, asking for help and advice and support, so much that I actually can't necessarily help everybody in the way that I want to. But I can certainly signpost people to help that might be out there. So I really appreciate your kind words. Um, Believe it or not, Belle, you and I, well, we've been recording this. You and I can chat forever if you want to. But in terms of this podcast recording, we've been chatting for almost 2 hours.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I think you have to go somewhere at some point.
I don't quite yet, but almost 2 hours. I'm
Um,
not
I know
ex-
you're 5 hours behind me. I think you have to go
yeah,
to
no,
the.
it is not yet 2 o'clock, so I'm good on time, but oh my goodness, that's more than I
Yes,
thought.
it will
Time.
be one of my longest podcasts.
I'm so sorry.
You don't have
One
to
of my
apologize for anything. You don't have to apologize for anything.
no,
It's not that late in the UK. I'm not going to bed straight after this. I've got other things to get to do. Um,
yeah, so I don't want to keep you from doing those things. I'm trying to work on condensing my thoughts and condensing my story. It's just I'm new to speaking on larger public platforms, and it's, you know, it's a learn.
I've certainly loved hearing your story, and I've appreciated your honesty. Um, Certainly some of the stuff that you experienced and you went through in your teenage years that have helped shape you for who you are, or what you're experiencing now in your life. You know, and we all run to Krishna. We all seek out Krishna for different reasons. Ultimately, we're all dissatisfied with the material world. You know, that was the first generation of hippies in the 1960s. They were disillusioned and they were unhappy with what was happening in the kind of establishment of the political system. Now, I am not actually anti-establishment, but I am disillusioned with things that happen in the world, and I recognize that this Krishna consciousness movement is a movement that shares a philosophy, that practices a philosophy that provides so many wonderful answers to the solutions, or sorry, to the problems going on in the world. So the fact that you've shared your story in the way that you have, I have found really, really inspiring. And I hope that other people will feel inspired by your story, and your honesty has been really quite touching, actually. You know, you and I have never met before, really, and you've come on this podcast. It's going to be seen by thousands of people, and you've talked about some of the challenges that you've been through in your life, and that's
Thank
just
you.
wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that, because especially given the fact that it's almost 2 hours, I felt like, forgive me if any of my words were selfish, or, you know, out of rambling without meaning or purpose of service, because ultimately part of me is like, oh, I wish I cut the personal story in half and spent that other half talking about Krishna, because how wonderful is Krishna. I mean, but I
Um,
guess it's all. Yeah.
Belle, I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers and listeners at home, and you and I can have a brief debrief after we've stopped the podcast. But a big thank you to Belle from New Jersey, uh, in the United States, our allies across the pond. We've got a special relationship, the UK and the US. I don't really understand what it means, but we've had a special relationship for a long time. Um, uh, it, Thank you for being our 89th guest on the Hare Krishna Project podcast. It's quite phenomenal. It's great for you, great for you, great for our viewers. So a big thank you to Belle for being our guest this week. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit that all-important subscribe button so you can hear about future podcasts and future video updates from the Hare Krishna Project. If you're watching or listening to this on Facebook, please do like or follow the Hare Krishna Project page on Facebook so you can keep updated about what I'm up to, what the Hare Krishna Project's up to. We've got some really exciting podcasts coming up soon, which I'm not really going to mention yet because they are quite simply breathtaking. So until next week, I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Yeah.